joined us later in the afternoon. I thought perhaps the presenters could briefly say hello. So in case someone didn't hear earlier in the day what your voice sounds like, they'll be able to identify you as you participate in the discussion. And I thought I'd go in the order of the presentations. So Michelle Mead, if you could just say hello.
Hi, glad to be back.
Okay, folks, so that's Michelle. Eric Wazowski, are you still with us?
He may not be coming on because he couldn't get on other formats, so he may show up online.
Perfect. Okay. And Joy Hamill?
Hi, everybody. It's Joy.
Okay. Lex, were you able to stay on with us now? Okay, well, maybe he'll participate in on the chat as well. And obviously, Mike Jones, you're still with us?
Hi, yes, still here.
Okay, and John Morris, just in case we did get someone just joining us now.
Okay, hi folks, I'm here.
Okay, so those are our voices from the presenters, and as far as introductions to new voices, we have invited a few people to lead our discussion, and I'd like each of them to say hello as I introduce them. In order of the names on the slide, Paul Baker, are you able to get on the phone? I see you there in the chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Paul.
Okay, pleasure.
I don't think, go ahead.
Uh, should I leave the phone muted or leave it open?
Sure. You can mute when you're not actively talking, and that way you can make as much noise when you're not talking as you want, right? So Paul's joining us from the Georgia Tech Center for Advanced Communications Policy. Catherine is going to join us in a minute on the phone. Let us know, Catherine, when you're able to do that. Marta Garcia from the National Rehabilitation Information Center, NARIC, High Tech Services. You want to say hi, Marta?
Hi, everyone.
Great. Glad you could join us. And Peg Nozick from the Center for Research on Women with Disabilities, Baylor College of Medicine. Peg, were you able to dial in?
Yes, I'm here, and
Wonderful.
thank you very much for inviting me.
Sure, absolutely. Catherine, let me know when you're on, and or maybe just the first time you are able to talk on the phone and interjecting into the conversation, if you could just state your name so that people know that it is you. Okay, so I also wanted to thank those of you, particularly, I know Peg Nozick, Paul Baker, you've been participating in day one and in the chat, so we really appreciate even, the participation you've given to us already. Before we turn to the discussion questions, I'd like to take a tip from some of our presenters and get a better sense of our audience, of who's in the room, and let you respond to a couple of quick polls. If you do have any difficulty in responding to the polls, please let us know via chat. So as I mentioned, all of the presenters this afternoon are supported by KTDR's funding agency, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. So that's why we thought we'd ask via this poll if you yourself are a NIDLR grantee, or if you're not, or sometimes people aren't really sure what all of the funding sources that their employer might have, so you could just put a little don't know there if you don't know. Okay, so it looked like we did have quite a few, maybe about half of us. Now this one is for those of you, Lauren, yeah, okay, so we've got, Lauren, why don't we go ahead and go to the next poll? I'll wait till it's up. Okay, so for those of you who are NIDLR grantees, for those of you who aren't, you may or may not know that NIDLR grantees are working across a variety of areas, and these are official designations that the funding agency makes. Some are in employment outcomes, some are health and function. As you've heard from our presenters today, some work in technology for access and function, and others focus on participation and community living. There are other categories that we didn't include. So if you are from a project that, maybe it's from disability demographics or capacity building, go ahead and let us know that in the chart. Yes, and as Jeff Chaikin is pointing out, we do recognize that, like KTDR itself, we serve all of the grantees of all of the agencies, so that's why we made this select all that apply. But yeah, it looks like a really wide distribution of projects there, so that's great. It's great to have such multiple perspectives. So the third one, we want to draw back into our conversation, those of you who may or may not be NIDLR grantees. So whether or not you're a NIDLR grantee, could you just let us know the option that best fits your job, whether you're a researcher, a knowledge translation professional, a social media user, a technical assistance provider or trainer, a clinician, service provider, or practitioner. Again, maybe you wear all of those hats, or you have a unique role that isn't in there that you could tell us about in the chat box. I would say these things remind me of listening to microwave popcorn. You kind of look and wait until it doesn't move anymore, right? So I think we're down to the kernels now. So okay, so we got, again, pretty much a wide breadth of perspectives there. Interestingly, they happen to be, the order that we put them on the slide is also the order of prevalence, okay? Information dissemination, what else have we got here? People are putting in the chat, education, research, education district webmaster, that's interesting, policy, information dissemination. Marta is noting that on the NARIT project, she does a lot of outreach with the Spanish language community. Okay, so let's move on now to the meat of our discussion. We've done our introductions, so I'm going to go ahead and move past the polls and go ahead and get into talking about the discussions. So how do those of you, there are quite a few presenters today were NIDLR grantees, the reactors, most of you are NIDLR grantees. So do you find that how did the presentations relate to your research findings or project findings? Anything? Or is anybody else working on an app or using GIS or gone through similar needs assessment? Go ahead.
This is Peg Nosek. We're working on an intervention that we're delivering in the virtual world of Second Life. And so I'm following very closely what's happening in the gaming world, because some people regard Second Life as a game, even though it's really not. It's just a venue, a virtual venue. And then you can create whatever you want in that venue. What we've done with our intervention, and it relates to weight management, and it's called Go Woman. We have a virtual workshop. So what happens is we get women together at the same time, and it really replicates a face-to-face workshop in as many ways as you possibly can, but it has a lot of the extras in it that are unique to being in a virtual world. So we can do adventures, we can go visit different places, we can do relaxation exercises by having the women fly or suspend themselves in the air in a lotus position. Because you adopt an avatar, you create an avatar to represent yourself. So in any case, it's been so much fun, and we've had a great time working on and getting the feedback from the women. Now, what we saw in Sky Hard was definitely a game, and I was very interested in following the methodologies that they use, and I would love to learn more about it and how successful it can be. Now, I was a little perplexed about why they didn't find more impact of what they did. And I wasn't quite sure about the length of exposure or how many people were, I didn't catch how many people were tested on the results that they displayed. So maybe could we get a little bit more detail about that?
Sure. Thank you so much for the questions. This is Michelle. So SciHard, in fact, originally we had thought about, did we want something that was more interactive in a Second Life type of place? And what we had decided was a standalone game that allowed for the scalability, so could be created and then wouldn't need to be monitored, that it could be used by any number of individuals. That the process of the game currently takes about 5 hours to get through, provided someone is actually familiar with gaming. Myself, not being as much of a gamer, takes more time, particularly with sending the bombs back to Dr. Shrink at the end to get him to be defeated. But it's all with regard to the process. I'm trying to think about the complex questions there. That when we presented the data on the screen, that was from the evaluation part of the study, that we had only 14 individuals who completed those, which definitely we are less likely to notice results among 14 individuals, particularly as we didn't really set ceilings and floors. So we tried to avoid individuals who were or not qualify individuals who were experiencing significant degrees of distress, but in fact for individuals who were doing too well to participate in some of the clinical trial, or where we wouldn't receive, where we wouldn't necessarily expect a change on, for example, self-efficacy, we sent them there. So some of it may be that there was a ceiling effect on the measure because people were doing too well. They were the ones doing well are a lot of the times the easiest to engage in clinical trials. But we really hope to be seeing something different and more nuanced type of results with the clinical trial. So, and that is ongoing.
Thank you. One other question I had about that presentation too, and I mentioned it in the chat, was why only on men with spinal cord injury or boys, since these were adolescents. And that brings up the question about anything related to online and particularly related to gaming, and that is that there are huge gender differences. Women use online modalities very, very differently than men do. And particularly in a gaming context, the whole notion of competition, cooperation, incentives, conflict resolution, strategies, problem solving, all of that, the whole mechanism is really very, very different depending on culture, depending on gender, depending on education level, all of that stuff. So it's a real challenge to design these such that it would be applicable to all the varieties that we see in people with disabilities. So I think it may even be prudent for those of us who are developing these kinds of interventions to have tailoring built into the program. So that's just a suggestion for those who are developing these kinds of interventions.
I think that's a great point. We really did pick the target audience, and once again based more on the demographics of spinal cord injury. There was also some thought that the acceptability of other forms of intervention, such as, for example, psychotherapy, may be higher among some females than it would be males. And so this then would provide an alternative method of sort of approaching the ideas around the training within self-management type of interventions and approaches. When we first, there was also the issue of course, the number of resources involved with the development of the game. Initially, we had thought we would have characters with different levels of injury, but based on that would have then created 3 story arcs, each with its own
Right.
branching logic from those, or that what we really wanted to convey was the issues of physical accessibility associated with wheelchair use, as well as then some of the key management features. So, our players in a manual wheelchair rather than a power wheelchair. And some of that just was because of the nature of the design decisions and what it would take.
Thank you for answering. I have some other comments, but I'll let others ask questions. So whenever there's a break, I'll ask some of my others. Thank you.
Okay, well, we did promise that we would pose some of the questions that were in the chat while Michelle, you and Eric were presenting, and one of them was from Marta, and you're with us now on the line. Marta, did you want to ask your question about being able to have used the data when you were working as a recreational therapist?
Sure. Like you said, I used to work as a recreational therapist in the pediatric unit, and I had kids ranging from small kids to teenagers, and we used to actually use the Wii as an intervention. But to be able to get more games and things like that, it took a lot of effort to get for management to give us the okay without any data backup. So I guess my question is, you sort of answered it before, is how are you sharing the data and your and the game with communities like the recreational therapy community, who's working with people with SEI?
There are different levels of data here, and some of the ones, for example, the use of the we got from existing articles about rehabilitation and game use that are out there. The Journal of Games for Health, in particular, probably about half of the articles are associated with individuals with disabilities and the development or use of online games for that group. The specific survey data was coming out through the Journal of Spinal Cord Injury, and I'd be happy to share our proofs. You can either email me or I can send them to Anne to post and have available online. And then the last one, we submitted the development article to Rehabilitation Psychology and are waiting to hear about it. I think another embedded within that is, or maybe associated with it, is even as the individual plays SciHard, how can you tell what's going on or where they are and get useful information from it? We built into the game places where we could capture the in-game behavior, because we did want to be able to say, okay, did the person go all the way through? Are they having problems with remembering to do pressure releases versus thinking about the impact of eating certain things on their character? Are they just doing it for fun? And so, if they want to kill off a character, are they playing multiple times, and so they have a different range of outcomes, which is kind of one of the benefits, exploring the cause and effect of behavior. But to the extent that we have those collected on a server, we're talking about trying to then have a visualization of that information in a meaningful way that can be used or interpreted by rehab professionals, if that's, that's going to be one of the things we're exploring.
Awesome, thank you. And I will definitely email you after the session and to get all the information and everything. So thank you.
Fantastic. I guess the two things then related to that, we are still recruiting, so if you know of anyone who may be apply and interested, that 13 to 29-year-old, please send them forward or get the information. The other thing is if anyone wants to play and give us their feedback themselves, other researchers, clinicians or such, we'd also be happy to share the game for download, and especially if you're willing to provide feedback. It's more we just want to continue to control access because it is in clinical trial. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And you may be getting some help there from Judy Zazula, who notes that her model system has a special focus on the use of technology to improve healthcare self-advocacy for people with SCI. They're launching an RCT evaluating the use of an avatar as an SCI coach and educator to prevent secondary conditions of SCI, including regular skin effects, pressure relief, so quite similar to your app. Working on ways to reinforce personal goals and considering various approaches, including access to brief video games as reinforcement. So, great minds. Whenever possible, we're referring consumers to SCI Hard for possible participation and are very interested in all things SCI Hard. So since you are recruiting, I'm looking at Jennifer Weaver's question, have you thought to share this information with therapists who could have their patients use the app via Facebook groups?
I'm not sure exactly how. I mean, we've tried to present at some of the spinal cord injury conferences, but we would be delighted to be able to know of a specific Facebook group or know of an organization to maybe be able to get out more of this, more information about the study and both for the RCT as well as just to get ongoing feedback and input.
Okay, and I do want to get to some of the other presenters and reactors, but since we promised that we would answer all the chat questions, Barbara Pizzatillo was wondering when you introduce this game to clients in the hospital during rehab discharge later. I'm sure there must be very individual factors in this decision. Please feel free to answer after the presentation.
Okay, just as I said quickly, we try and associate it with have an individual clinician. We're not going to be introducing it to individuals who we think are at risk for depression or anxiety. And then we do take it on a case-by-case basis. It's not currently integrated into our clinical practice, although we hope it will get there. We haven't pushed it in that way until we're trying to finish the research aspect of it.
Okay, and I did want to remind everyone, including the presenters and reactors, that we do have an expo associated with this conference website. So the idea is just like a real conference would have an expo room where there'd be vendors and exhibitors. Well, so do we. So if there are things, I mean, we've tried to find some of the presenters' presentations, not just their presentations from today, but different outputs that you've done that are relevant, that kind of show the caliber of all of you. But if there's things that we didn't catch or that weren't public yet that you'd like to have us add to that expo, please do send them to whoever you were working with or to any of us on the phone here. Yeah, someone has pulled up the expo so we can take a little look at it. Thank you. If you scroll down, you can see here are the conference materials and archives. Here's presenter resources. And there's some great chat going on there about ways, Michelle, that you might recruit, and I would imagine that might be also advantageous to the other presenters or reactors on the phone thinking through about your own outreach. So we did recruit other people to join us in this discussion. Paul, do you have any thoughts that you've been having as we've been talking that you'd like to share with the group? I guess he's putting his thoughts together, but feel free to chime in as they do occur to you. Joy, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have some questions from registrants that we thought we would bring up now. One of them, it says, one of the purposes of the ADA park research is to identify and examine key environmental factors contributing to these disparities. Did you think that, can you name a few environmental factors that really stood out? You know, you looked at so many different aspects of disparity. So which one do you think is, if someone really had to focus on it, would you highlight? Not just one, but however many you
Well,
think.
yeah, certainly any of the transportation access, you know, especially the public transportation ones and accessibility of it, you know, are interrelated to just about all three of our areas, right? And kind of override all, you know, like they're related both to community living, community participation, and work. So any of those environmental factors, and we're actually adding in a whole bunch more on transportation accessibility and quality and paratransit now, just because those seem to be the ones people repeatedly are asking for and saying are the most problematic for them. So that's one example of, I think, a good social determinants of health environmental factor.
Okay. And has there been direct links yet from the data to any like local level policy change, whether related to transportation or other realms?
Yeah, I don't know if Lex is still on the line. Is he on the line? Because in the ADA park, yeah, I don't see him on. Houston has been using the transportation data. In fact, they actually asked Lex to be on their governor's committee on transportation because of that, right? That they're now doing a governor's committee, and he's one of the key people on it, bringing together all the different stakeholders in urban and rural transportation in that neck of the woods. So it's been used, I know, there. I know that Marion Vessels, who's in the ADA, the Mid-Atlantic ADA region, so the DC and Baltimore region, because of the data, took it back to her community of transportation stakeholders, some of whom are policymakers, some of whom are consumer groups. And because of that, now they just had a one-day large conference on action planning for transportation disparities, a webinar and a conference that went with it across all the different stakeholders. So just two examples, right? I think several of the different regions are using it in that way, directly going to policymakers.
Yes, and in our Cater Center research in the previous, the Knowledge Translation for Employment Research Center, we interviewed policymakers about what made them likely to pick up research. And one thing that you're doing that they said consistently was having state-level data, and of course, even more micro, like you're noting at the municipal level. Catherine Fairchild has been able to join us on the chat from the Fibrous Dysplasia Foundation, and she is noting that she can speak from personal experience on school bus with lift canceling pickup at the last minute. And I think there's also, this is kind of anecdotal, but even within my neighborhood, there is now a proposition to eliminate a bus stop, which is right near the adult transition services for the school district. And it's good to know that this really micro level kind of data is out there to, because that's what activists need to really make some change, as you know, I think probably better than anyone.
Yeah, it's a good question there about the Uber. Yeah, thank you for bringing that one up. In Chicago, we just, because of transportation issues and data, just put in a class action lawsuit against Uber. So that is probably one of the biggest ones that the disability community is saying we need to do more research here about these pop-up, you know, kind of mass public things that are happening but aren't being monitored in the same way that, say, taxis and other public transit is being monitored. And so I think the idea of Uber and starting to put it into the mix of accessibility, not just availability, but accessibility, because in Chicago it would score very low on the accessibility front, I think would be a really interesting one.
Yeah, and it was a big blow here in Austin to people with visual impairments when Uber and Lyft and those, you know, kinds of ride-sharing companies got voted out. So that's for reasons we can't go into right now. But Catherine's noting it seems people start to rely on the startups for all and may fail to protect the older, more standby options, assume everyone can access, and we cannot. Right, and I think that has broader application. Also, I don't know, the other, our friends from the Shepherd Center, um, have you noted, can you talk about apps in general, not just the ones you've funded, and what proportion you think of those are accessible?
So what proportion of existing apps are excess of the million plus on each marketplace? I honestly, I couldn't. I think, a bunch of, developers, with different particular interests and disability population concerns have, made, real focused efforts at producing apps for some individuals. I couldn't really say, of the total population of apps, how many are really accessible or not accessible. I think maybe the question is maybe not the, an absolute question of accessible or not accessible, but kind of how accessible, or how are there multiple ways of interacting with the app. For instance, the healthy timer we sort of demonstrated silently, it had multiple modes of receiving the alerts. So haptic alerting, vibration, if you will, visual alerts, and audio alerts. And so in that sense, that would be an example of having multiple ways of accessing that app. And I would guess that a fair number or a lot of apps targeted at mainstream consumer markets don't have that multiple sort of ways of engaging, or that at least it's perhaps not a primary concern. And I think that's about as much as I could say. Mike, did you want to add to that? No?
No, I mean, a lot of it is as accessible as the device that you're using the app on. So if someone could use their smartphone without any accessibility impediments, then they could likely access and use most of the apps that are available in the marketplace. But as far as any assessment of the current universe of apps and how accessible they are in themselves to different types of disabilities, I have no information on that.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years ago now, when we were first talking about, proposing an app factory, we had some concern that on the production side, it was kind of like a cottage industry. So you had, thousands and tens of thousands of app developers, many, with sort of relatively little training, producing apps and populating the marketplace. And that was part of the motivation. Mike had mentioned that earlier, is that, well, we wanted to help, fill some of that gap. Mike?
No, the averse question is one of interest. How many accessibility apps are there out there, and how good are those? I think certainly a small subgroup of all apps, but there is a need for someone, I'm not sure how they would be funded, to go through and really rate in some fashion the quality of the apps that are out there. Many of these are one-off apps that are, maybe usable for one or two individuals, but haven't been thoroughly tested with a larger user group.
Yeah, so and I think that was the other concern. People who, there's the sort of stereotypical, tale of the father who's got a kid with developmental disabilities and, and he's a bit of a programmer, so he develops a solution that works perfectly for that one individual. And we know, particularly in the area of developmental disabilities, the abilities of the individual could be highly variable. And so there was that, that was, one of the many sort of concerns about this, if you will, the structure of the producer side of apps, then and I suppose still now. So.
Okay, yeah. So Michelle is noting that regarding accessibility of apps like games, it might be that they focus on different types of accessibility for people with physical versus cognitive versus sensory impairments. And that reminds me of a really rich conversation Paul Baker and I had last week during the practice session, and I think he is with us now. So Paul, did you want to kind of share that with people?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can.
Well, I was tempted to say, can you hear me now, but that's so cliche. Anyway, yeah, one of the interesting things is the design dynamic between specific accessibility and general usability. And as John and Mike were just talking about, one of the interesting aspects of the App Factory was to encourage people to use universal design approaches. But in the term of designing products, the interesting question is, what do you design to? And how do you balance design constraints, design preferences, design uses by developers or engineers who may not actually be aware of some of the limitations. So I think it's interesting to try to figure out whether you design for not the lowest common denominator, but if you will, the most universally designed products versus products that are specifically targeted. And this kind of dynamic, I think, is quite fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a fine line to walk sometimes, or just careful decisions that need to be made. So that really points to the value that all the presenters have pointed out in their presentations of doing careful data collection on your audience, justifying, for example, in Michelle's case, why the app is targeted specifically to young men.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is Peg. There are some things that are fairly universal, like speech recognition, and certainly that's come a long way. I think, have we made progress in having speech recognition be adaptable to people with speech impairments?
This is Paul Baker. That's out of my specific area, but from what I follow on an interest basis on the speech recognition, if it's not, and again, this is something that John and Mike might know better, if it's not currently possible, I think the algorithms are getting better, and it may reach the kind of 90% target level shortly.
Great. Well, thanks for that information, Paul. We have about 5 minutes left. I need a couple of minutes at the end of the hour just to kind of wrap things up. But is anyone, been really wanting to raise their hand and, share something?
I wanted to ask one more question, and it really covers all three of the presentations. Is we have some wonderful tools that we've been exposed to today. How can this information get out to all the people who could really use it? What really on the knowledge translation techniques that could inform people with disabilities living in rural areas. I've got a chorus of support behind me here. How can we get the word out about the availability of all of this technology and information?
Marta, did you want to speak to the work that NARIC does about that?
Sure. You can definitely send us all that information, and one of the things, a lot of what we do is share what the NIDLR community does through social media, our blog, news and notes, which is the weekly email that goes out, and we make it accessible, pardon me, having end-of-day brain issues, I guess, and make it and translate it for the everyday user. For example, with SkyHeart, we could definitely put that out in social media in a form of, hey, check this game out. For people, if you have a spinal cord injury, check this game out, etc. And we, and not only do we do that in English, but in Spanish as well. So it goes to a really huge community, not only here in the States, but overseas as well. please share what you guys are doing with us so that we can then share it with the disability community at large.